Welcome to this panel. I'm really excited about this crew of people. We had a really great panel prep call last week, and so many wonderful organic things flowed from that. And I hope they reflow today. But if there's going to be really good stuff regardless. Um, so you're here to hear about taking risks, smart risks. You care about experimentation. You want to do things the right way, whatever the right way means for you. And that's a whole thing that we'll probably get into also. Um, you read the description. I don't have to reread it for you. We are here with a really, really great crew of people, and I will introduce them one by one. They'll tell us why they're here, why they care about this topic, and then we'll jump right in because we only have less time than I always think we do with these things. Feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A box in Zoom. We'll try to get them as organically into the conversation as possible. If we can't, we're going to be in the technical strategy channel in the Slack afterwards, so you can find us there. But without wasting more time, let's get going. Yenny, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here today.
Sure, thank you. My name is Yenny, originally from Hong Kong. Right now, I'm based in Germany. Currently, I'm VP of product at Charles, but then in my previous lives, I've also been in engineering management across the API space at Rapid, as well as conversational AI space at Raza. Very excited to be talking about this topic today. Throughout my career, mostly I've been serving along with the team enterprise customers. So oftentimes security is not just an after sight thinking or just in terms of quality. It's sometimes even like the product that we sell, right? Because enterprise cares about that so front and center. And at the same time, it concerns a lot of how we develop product. So previously I care about it from the engineering side, and now I care about it from the product side. So very excited to be discussing this topic with everyone.
I feel like that two hat perspective is really important in this space too. All right, Stevie.
Yes, my name is Stevie Dieter, and I'm a principal software engineer at DexCare. We are a healthcare platform that is seeking to enable excellent access to healthcare to care, prevent, and treat illness in the United States. And I am really passionate about this topic from the engineering side of things. I've been really working on championing, improving our overall development process so that we can get software out faster. We can actually do experiments, but as you might imagine, in the healthcare space especially, security is a huge concern, especially amongst our customers who are primarily healthcare systems. So we have to make sure that we're always keeping that first in front of mind. And so I'm interested in sharing my own experiences and learning from this great group of people, strategies and techniques for improving that.
Perfect. All right, next up, Luke.
Hey, everybody. My name's Luke. I'm the Chief Product Officer and one of the co-founders of SemGrep. And SemGrep is very shortly a security tool, but we build really, really fast code scanning tools that run everywhere and that are meant for basically software engineers and security teams to both use and get a little bit of something out of. Reason why I joined this panel is I work a lot with engineering teams and security teams and see a lot of the frictions and tensions between these groups. And I've seen both ends of the spectrum where actually there's no tension and these teams are just very, very close together and work, I think, really well together to go quickly. And the opposite end of the spectrum, and I think the kind of stereotypical security teams and engineering teams don't get along. One group is trying to slow down the other. So wanted to dive into maybe what the fast teams are doing and see if there's something we can all learn from that. My background, I started as a software engineer, and then I moved to be a sales engineer, and then I moved to be a PM. And I've always built products and tools for other software engineers. So always been excited about automation and just making software engineering simpler because I thought it was too hard when I was a software engineer.
It is. It still is. So keep going. All right, finally, we have Jaime.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jaime Jorge. I'm CEO co-founder of Codacy. I'm speaking today out of Lisbon, Portugal. Codacy, the company that I founded, does essentially, it started really with code review automation, but now we do much more of quality and security. We make sure that code that is being merged is clean, is secure. It also has high quality. And so the reason why I joined this panel is because I find it extremely interesting that over the last 10 years that we've been creating our company, that has always been a question for many teams, especially smaller ones, the balance between how much they can not really think about either security or quality just to go really fast, as opposed to the benefit they would get from protection with security scanning, but also, unit test coverage and things like that. So all of these things have been an open-ended question for many of our customers, and we've tried as much as possible to guide them. So yeah, that's really exciting for us.
So many perspectives, so many thoughts. All right, so first topic that we ended up talking about in the panel prep session was around like why is it that so frequently this experimentation velocity is pitted at odds with quality? Why is it that so many people have this impression, this just pervasive sense that you can't move fast and not break things, to unquote Mark Zuckerberg famously. And I'm going to ask Stevie to chime in first.
Yeah, so a lot of the things that I've seen is sort of hinted at, and some of the other introductions is I've seen several places where it's seen as two separate parts of the world. Engineers engineer, security people know about security, and engineers write all the stuff and that gets handed over to security, and security does the scans and they have the tools that they have and they say, oh, wait, no, this isn't ready to go. Thinking through it, it comes back to one of those things I keep saying to my teams, which is that it's making the same mistake over and over again. And I would really like to make some new interesting mistakes. I'm bored of that mistake. So finding ways to make it really easy to write secure software, as opposed to now where I feel like we have this security theater kind of concept where it's just like at some point somebody runs all the scans and they tell you if it's good or not, as opposed to, this is how to think about writing your software from the ground up so that it is always secure. It's simple things like making sure that you don't reinvent SQL injection. So it really is that sense of why do we think that security isn't as fundamental to algorithms when we write really good software.
I'll just want to add on. I think that doing this requires pretty mature tooling. And so what ends up happening is like if you don't have the right tooling in place, a lot of these checks or the concerns get caught too late in the process, right? And so you end up, hey, I've actually already shipped my code. I've already committed it. It's already in production. A week later, a month later, a year later, you're coming back to me to tell me that there's a problem. And so I think like that just introduces a lot of the friction where you lose the context of the fix, and the fix or the change is now expensive, where it would have been really, really cheap if it had happened, in the IDE, if it happened at code review time or CI/CD. And so my sense is like a lot of the tooling that we've had as a community has it's not really for modern CI/CD. Obviously, a lot of new companies and a lot of new tools have come out, so like we're getting there. And then the one thing I would say is mature tooling doesn't mean that you have to build it yourself. I actually think that now there's a lot of stuff you can just go out and use, whether that's open source or commercial, to get your kind of tooling maturity maybe like high very, very quickly. And then you don't have to be a Google, a Facebook, an Apple, kind of another with teams that are devoted to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And that also echoes with what Stevie mentioned on making it easy, no? And I think there's also a process angle with it and how that relates to software design and architecture. So I think in a lot of companies, we would have processes like RFC or like a review process. So in that discussion, we already talk about like software scaling. We talk about maybe the load, like we talk about like what makes the design good, right? And in this case, like security is also like one aspect of that discussion, right? So if we can build that into the process and not making that as like a blocker per se, but more like how can we even educate like engineers to be more mature through these types of discussion, then there is a more positive perspective towards the topic, no?
Jaime, you're muted, I think.
What a rookie mistake.
There you go.
What I fully agree with what everyone said. I think as much as you can build a level of abstraction of both tooling and processes so that you can start speaking in different software terms or different, don't really go into the detail of just trying to review the code style, the best practices, but then also kind of the security side of things, having tooling not only is very capable, such as SemGraph, but also tools like what we provide that enables full integration, immersive experience of having those tools within your workflow. So really optimize as much as possible your time. We find that that's really important. Standardization is also very important. So if you have one team coding and all of them use one tool fully configured, easy. If you have 100 teams, all of a sudden it's going to be hard as well. But I think those things really help. But also, I think you need to weigh in how much of that is really required, frankly. And I'm a quality and security vendor, so I want everyone to use our tools, but I want to also make sure that things are weighted, because many times you got to go fast, and that is debt that you can carry and incur, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I sort of want
go
to
ahead.
piggyback off that. Oh, sorry. Because that really feeds into sort of the push and pull that I've seen often in many different environments, which is that everybody agrees, yeah, security is very important. We need it from the ground up. They pick a tool, they start running it. It starts blocking your merges. I'm sorry, you're slowing me down. I can't get work done. So it's just like, okay, we'll turn it off for now. And we'll get back to it. And then it goes back to exactly what Luke was talking about, where then it just becomes really expensive to go engineer it back in. So how do you find that right amount of friction? Security is friction for if done well, it's friction for a good reason. It's realize what you're doing before it gets out into production versus the after fact friction.
Yeah, coming from the product angle, I think there is also a factor on like what is the stage of the release you're looking at, right? I think you should use more heavy-handed tools like towards like GA or like at later stages of the release once you know that there is product market fit. Not to say that we don't pay attention to this topic at all, but I think it's always like the balance between how much risk are you exposing to when you say you just do a user test, right, with a few people with customers. And then oftentimes it's through communications and process that sometimes this very important detail, which is, how ready is our product, kind of being missed in that conversation. And I think that's actually a key to how we would plan our security posture and tooling. No?
Right. There's a lot of these different axes to figure out where you're comfortable on. It's not just the one axis of I'm comfortable with no risk, I'm comfortable with all the risk. It's based off of customers, it's based off of features, it's based off of the space that you're operating in. I mean, I know from our own experience at Slack, like we roll out features to different customers at different rates, depending on whether they're really big, important enterprise customer and they just don't want that change that fast. We released the new Slack UI recently, and we had to figure out how to do that in a way that was much more thoughtful for the really, really big customers, right? Than like the free teams that just show up and sort of do their own thing. And I think that's something that you mentioned also, Yenny, when we were chatting last week, is having that perspective of being able to pull specific customers and understanding this is their risk profile, this is their risk profile, and managing all of that. It's a lot of variables. There's just like a lot of variables. I didn't mean to cut you off, Jaime. I know that you unmuted there briefly.
No, you touched something that I think is really important, which is the context and the situation, kind of what the company does, right? So, I think, and I think that's a responsibility on leadership, engineering leadership, to know that and to guide the team in the right direction. So, I think if you're moving fast and breaking things, that's probably fine if you're developing a web app and you're shipping that. If you're launching a blood testing company, maybe it's not. So I think it's really important to have that context also, because it's not the same rule for every single company. So just wanted to reiterate that importance.
Luke, you mentioned earlier that, oh, sorry, Yenny, did you have something to add?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Luke, you mentioned earlier that you've seen these two extremes, right? Of like teams where it's very dysfunctional and there's this like very at odds relationship, like antagonistic almost, right? And then you have these teams that it just like works. And given that understanding the risk profile and all the variables at play is a conversation, like Jaime mentioned, about between engineering leadership, product leadership, security leadership, if you have a chief security officer of some kind. What have you seen about the teams that have worked well that is an insight that maybe folks could benefit from learning about?
Yeah. So I'll share as an insight and TBD how much you will benefit from it, because I think the in practice might be hard. But
Yeah.
my sense is that the teams that are maybe like healthiest, or the relationship between security and engineering is healthiest, is when there is a balance of power. So an example of this, I think actually Google has done a good job here. So they have an internal tool called Tricorder, which SemGrep actually is inspired by in terms of its, I guess, like philosophy, where the security team is the one who said, hey, we have to have a security tool, right? We have customer obligations, we have legal obligations, we have compliance obligations. So we have to have a tool. But we're mandating, there's a tool we're mandating that it's going to run. But you as the developer, you're going to decide ultimately if the results that we produce are good or bad. And if results are bad, then we're going to turn off that rule or that check, or we can switch out the tool. But it's generally not the healthiest teams. It's not, oh, there's a result, and so we're breaking your build and we're blocking. When we first started the company and first started working with security teams, I thought that would be the case. It's like, oh, we have a smoking gun issue. Boop, build is blocked. Thou shalt not merge. In practice, actually, I would say very few of the security teams we work with, and there's a broad variety of sizes, industries, and stages, actually break the build. They're very, very hesitant to do that, but they will surface, hey, you may not have considered that this is an auth issue. Hey, you may not have considered that this looks like a hard-coded secret, or you're using raw SQL and you should be using our object relational map or something like that. And so it's more of this suggestion. And so now you balance kind of the power, where ultimately the developer is the king or queen of this is good, this is not good, and can make the decision. The less healthy is where, hey, you're actually breaking the build and you're really like mandating that you do something about it. But these tools are not always perfect. And so I think that is, I like to think about like tolerances in a system. The precision of these tools, while high, we can have some pretty big misses sometimes. And so it just isn't necessarily appropriate to be like, oh, we block on everything. So it's something that we've been battling with.
Makes a ton of sense. Jaime, I'm curious for your perspective, given you also work on a very similar tool.
It's very similar to Luke. That's really what we've been experienced over the last few years, is that so we provide also gates that have a multitude of different factors, whether those are sometimes even stylistic code changes, they're not conforming, but also best practices, code style, unit testing, and also security recently that we've introduced that as well. And what we find is that different things work for different companies. There are companies that are absolutely adamant that one single issue will break the build, and that's okay with us. If there's 1% lower of unit test coverage, then yes, we don't want that code merge. But there are companies that see that as really frustrating and really voice that, and so they need flexibility to make sure, look, fine, I want the guidance is good, but don't block me because I'm really moving fast. So that's really what we've seen also, is that flexibility is very, very, very important.
And I would add from an engineering side, one technique that we've been using for cases like that, where we find like, okay, we have this linting rule, or we have some other code coverage rule, where we realize that, that's not really very effective for us. So we use a decision doc so that we actually have documented that, because this goes to the value of automating things and making things clear and understood why you did that. Is there tends to be a lot of tribal knowledge of like, well, this is just the way we do it. And then you grow and you hire a whole bunch of new devs and they don't know why you do it that way. So I've found it personally to be much more effective. So like, here's where we write it down. Here's where you go to look at it. Oh, I see you're doing this. Here's the document that says, here's the reason why we decided we don't do it that way, or we do it this way. So that it's a way to keep everybody in the loop, and sort of continues to make you think like, okay, now I know why this rule is turned off, or this particular service gets an exception to the rules, and it's not the way everybody gets to go. So just in terms of reducing the friction among teams, that we did have this agreement.
I love that
Yeah,
idea.
and I
That's
think
so good.
yeah,
Yeah,
coming
Megan.
from that angle, yeah, like totally having that discussion, I think in the long run is actually saving some time, right? Like linting rules, security rules. Once you have, as a team, agreed on a certain standard, then the future time of having these ad hoc discussion reduces because we have agreed on a basic set of rules. So yeah, I see that actually as a productivity boost, right, in the long run, and it's a sign of a strong team.
I think the other thing that's really interesting about that is because you're providing the context for why we made the decision the way we made it, when it becomes clear maybe 2 years later that the context is completely different and just throw it out the window, we can totally throw this decision out the window. There's no more baggage associated with like continuing to hold whatever rule that was, because if there's anything we know, it's that everything, the only constant is change, right? And so everything's always shifting all the time. And I've found myself too in situations where I'm like, why the heck did we do it this way? And then I go Slack spelunking through the depths of our many, many years of history. And then I find one random message somewhere and I'm like, oh, that's why. Yeah, that's not true anymore. We can just throw that out the window. It's great. But I like the idea of having it in one place and having it be part of the engineering culture, right? Like you're doing this very deliberately rather than ad hoc. I need to go search through Slack to find any scraps of anything.
Or hopefully the
that.
engineer who was involved in the one conversation is still around and notices your Slack message when you ask the question. So yeah. And I just really want to sort of go back, to your comment about the context changing. We're continuing. We've been around, DexCare's been around long enough now that we are hitting the points where it's like, well, it was not designed this way because of this. And then you stop and be like, oh yeah, and that was one specific customer 3 years ago. Yeah, that's not relevant. Yes, go forward. Do something different.
A little bit of a shift back to what we were just talking about earlier. I just want to address one of the questions that came into the Q&A because I think it's a good one. So Tillman, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, says, speaking of standardization, I've experienced that security practices and automation become increasingly complicated with the number of different tech stacks that you run in an organization. At the same time, you want to empower teams to choose their own technologies based on what best fits their needs. How do you see this trade-off between standardization and autonomy in the context of security? Very good question. Who wants to take it first?
In terms of thinking about tech stack, right? I think one method that some platform teams have used is technology radar, right? So depending on the class you're talking about, like there's some tooling where intrinsically the company or the platform team can provide support, top-notch support when something goes down. And then the team's overhead is a bit smaller. But of course, the teams can also look into other technology, and that might be in the second ring where there's limited support. And that also reflects in the security tooling, right? So in the middle of the circle where you have top-notch support, I would expect that the tooling is very complete. In this case, it's less overhead for the team. So I think this aligns the right incentive, right, for the team. If you choose these core technologies, then you can have less overhead versus if you want to try out something new, it's not impossible, but then you need to take care of, say, security concerns or maybe other deployment concerns.
Yeah, I get, I guess, very uncomfortable if there's kind of mandates and like we cannot use these. These are the only technologies we can use. These ones we cannot. So maybe this goes back to the meta of our entire conversation, which is actually really about engineering and security culture at a company. For me, I'd be like, I think there needs to be a good reason for using a different language or experimenting with something, and it should be chosen based off of the maybe intent of the application, right? If this is a production critical service, you probably want it to be something that multiple people can understand, you can staff easily. So maybe we're not going to use, that brand new, very cool language that just came out, or new library. The other thing that we've seen is maybe standardization, not so much like across languages, but within a language. Hey, like how are we doing authentication? What are the libraries that we use for I don't know, rendering things to the screen, whatever it might be. And that actually, I do think is a place where you can bring in linting tools, SendGrep, Codacy, other, to say, hey, we see that you're using kind of our non-standard library for this. This is its first introduction to this project. Just so you know, we use this other library, and here's why. Here's the documentation discussion about it. So again, you're kind of providing these like guardrails where over time you're trying to reduce your surface area, but it's not the very black and white, like you can do this and you can't do that. It's just that, hey, if you're doing this, it should be intentional and rigorous, not because you looked for the first color randomizing library on, NPM, and this is the one that you found. So you can try to standardize, and I think tooling can help with that.
I would add that there's layers of standardization, kind of like, close to metal, and then obviously as high as you want it to be. What I mean is, if part of your team wants to work on Bitbucket, another part in GitLab, another in GitHub, then yes, you're having tons of autonomy, but you're not going to have a very collaborative team, especially if you want people to move between, I don't know, repos or projects or whatever. So I think autonomy is one of the most important things if you're building a team that has trust and to have really high collaboration levels. I do think that, as I mentioned before, as much as possible, building a level of abstraction where we want our tools. Sometimes we're in the phase where we're just choosing tools, and that's maybe not the best time to standardize because we're not sure yet of the tools and their value and all that. But as soon as we hit that critical moment where we're sure and that provides that the tools that we've chosen provide a ton of value, then standardization is really a common language that enables people to be mobile between parts of the company and different departments and different projects, right? And that's also really valuable. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, it's one area that we've specifically been working on where I am is the standardization on the tools and the particular languages that we do use. So yeah, it's not you get to use whatever package manager you want. We've looked at them all. They all have trade-offs, and we've chosen this one. In this case, it's because the tooling is the best. And the other sort of thing we point on to, like the comment specifically about if this is going to be a production important system, critical system, then maybe you should use the standard tooling. Sort of the way we think about it is like, do you want to be the only person on call for this ever? If so, then sure, you can write it in a whole new way. And then there is always going to be that friction of looking at like our going to the context of here are the languages we use. We have expertise in them. We've really doubled into them, but it is always important to keep your eye. How is the overall health of the infrastructure that you're working on? And security is a huge part of that. When there's, CVEs going off all the time on key libraries that your product is using, maybe it's time, is this really the right language we should be using? And then also going back into the security part of it too, is there somebody here who can ask those questions before you go off and run off, create this critical system? So yeah, you feel like just like everything else, there's that art in finding the balance of letting your engineers feel empowered to use the right tool for the job while making sure that it's the right decision for the company as a whole.
Yaniel, if you have something to add, now is the time to add it, because I think the next question in the Q&A just stems right off of what Stevie just said.
Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Because you mentioned, do we have the right person to be able to understand what to do? And I think this question from Kristen, which I also hope I'm saying that correctly, is all about upskilling and then learning the skills that you need to have in order to make those kinds of assessments. So I'll sort of summarize it a little bit, but they say, what do we think is the place of and best practices around focused upskilling in the adoption of these security practices and tools? They mentioned something about people not learning really well in anxiety-filled contexts. Boy, do I know about that. I have a small child. And they go on to say that I think that the same concept applies to security tools and practices. How can we effectively upskill devs in security so that they're not trying to learn the skills, tools, and processes in the midst of an actual incident, security event, everyone on deck. You got paged at 2 a.m. Bad times ensue. Yeah,
I'll just go at first pass, kind of a little bit of a lazy answer, but there's so much to know as a developer, right? So nowadays,
gosh.
first it was developers, and then now it's DevOps, and now it's DevSecOps, and this is all one person who has to know all of these things. And this is part of my frustration with software engineering these days, and when I was a software engineer. My sense is educating at the right moment. So you don't need to know everything. Like you don't need to know everything about how you do auth at your company until you're handling auth or auth sensitive stuff, right? Or maybe now we're doing stuff that's performance critical. Okay, now's the time to learn about performance decisions that we make and libraries we use. And so that's where I go back to this idea of mature tooling and kind of codifying some of these practices so that, hey, when I introduce an auth library, we actually have a customer where one of the rules that they've written is every time someone adds a new API route, they leave a comment automatically with SemGrep that says, hey, we see that you're adding a new route. Maybe your first time doing it, maybe it's not. But if it's your first time, here is the link to our wiki about it. And now you know. So now it's relevant, it's contextualized. I'm going to remember that stuff because I'm actually reading it. And so you're not giving everyone everything you have to learn at once, but you're making it these bite-sized pieces. And I think in that context, you can also link out to coursework and other things, which I kind of is not the right format for everyone, books and whatnot. But I like this idea that you can provide these little snippets and a link of hey, here's who to go talk to within the company if you want to learn more about this. And now it's a very safe environment. It's not threatening. It's not an incident. It's, oh yeah, I want to learn. I'm working on it. So I'll go meet with the senior engineer or the architect or the security team. And I can get my full context.
Yeah, to echo on this, look, you mentioned the safe environment. I think that's key. One of the things that we've tried that used to work at Yelp is these war games as well, where you could create a fun scenario or a fake scenario at which a security incident or any type of incident actually happens, no? And then you can encourage the team to solve it, but knowing that it's fake, no? So that's one way to take the sting out of the whole urgency situation. Another thing that we do is also just really good documentation and runbooks about how to handle incidents so that everybody gets freaked out a little bit, right? When you have things that are production critical and things that takes a lot of urgency to react to. So if you have a runbook on, okay, who is the incident coordinator, who is the communicator, who is the investigator, and then you have this set up dealing with security incidents or any type of production incidents is going to help a lot so that each person, you have a role that you follow. This is your responsibility and here's our plan. No? But yeah, I think it's a good question.
If I can just add on real quick to that, I feel like a lot of the discussion we've had so far, I worry can come across as, oh my God, there's so much process and infrastructure and everything I have to put in place. I have to write run books and decision documents and install tooling. So it's not an overnight process. You probably don't need this all overnight, but as you move along, as you have an incident, great, now's the time to think about, hey, how do we want to handle that differently? Next time, let's build a run book. And I think this stuff can take many years for what it's worth. I don't think it's overnight. And that's potentially okay, or probably okay, based off of where your company is, your project is, the product is. So again, I think there's been some discussion. Scale, be wary of the word should, right? So figure out what you actually need for your company at that time, and then incrementally you'll build this stuff out and get better and better and better. And eventually, when you're tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, you can have all of this stuff like Google or Facebook, which I feel like they often get pointed to as the kind of golden children of security and engineering teams, but they've been around for a very, very, very long time.
Well, and most of us aren't Google or Facebook, so we don't necessarily need to have all those processes.
Exactly.
I sort of wanted to tie that back into the concept of innovation and experimentation, of that, not everything has to be perfect the moment it goes out the door. Part of your experimentation might be, okay, we're launching a new feature. Let's figure out how we're going to monitor it. Let's figure out how we're going to see if there's any sort of security issues. That's the learning that we're getting from this experience. It doesn't have to be perfect before it gets out there, because you don't know how to write a good run book until you're in the situation where you have to write the run book. I mean, hopefully your first few experiences like that aren't the worst possible situation, but also that's the learning environment of it's safe, you're okay. Something went wrong, we're going to get through it, and then we're going to figure out all our learnings from that, and then hopefully not make that mistake again.
I wanted to add before we move on to the because I think Luke said something I really believe in, and I'm truly of the opinion that today we're living in a world where we successfully shifted left many responsibilities in software, all on top of the developer, and security is definitely one of them. And this is a huge overload and responsibility. You have to know a lot before you merge code, and that's there's a lot of anxiety, frankly. Tools and platforms help, but if your company has the size, leaning on your team, especially security team, creating sessions that could help you learn faster would be great. Challenges as we've been discussing, SMBs, 42% of SMBs have one employee to take care of security. That means that the best approach is what Luke is saying, in my opinion, which is you learn on the job. You trust your brain, you trust your smarts to go and learn whenever is required, and you take care of that. That's what we've been doing as engineers for all of our professional lives anyway.
So true. I want to push back a little bit actually on some of some of the ideas that were brought up, which they're great in theory. I feel like for a lot of them, of you get this nudge that like, hey, this might not be the best way to write this code, or to go back to like the SQL injection, like you may be SQL injecting, that is bad, and like learn more here. I don't know how many times I've clicked on the learn more here links, but it's very few, and I'm like willing to publicly admit that right here, right now. And I feel like the times that I run a team at Slack that is all about performance tooling. So we own all of load testing, we own all of our flame graph solutions, we own all of that. And there's only 3 of us supporting all of that for all of our backend engineers. And we've run through a bunch of gauntlet interviews with a bunch of backend engineers where we were asking them, like, why aren't you using Honeycomb? Like, it's the best. You should use it. Not that I do not get paid by Honeycomb to say this on this call. It's very good. I like it as a product. But we've had to go out and like, because we're spending a bunch of money on this product, and we were like telling people, like, why aren't you using it? And they're like, I go where the tools that I know already how to use are, and I just don't have the time to invest to learn another tool on top of all the other tools that I've already spent all this time learning how to use. And so if I can use Logstash to answer my question, I'm going to use Logstash. I'm not going to learn a new tool unless somehow this tool is easier for me to do everything I need to do. And the conversion from what I'm currently doing to that tool is basically zero. It's like downhill, water downstream, right? And so we're struggling with that problem all the time of like, how do we just like nudge people into using the tools that we think are better to answering all these questions? But it's like really hard. And I do not have a degree in psychology. So like, I struggle sometimes. I'm just curious what all of your takes are on that. Can you solve my problems for me? That'd be great. Thanks.
So one thing that I did, we use a competitor to Honeycomb, but one thing that I did that I think was reasonably effective is I started doing observability office hours, where it's like I'm going to have an hour every other week where people can show up and ask me questions about this tool that we've told you that you're going to use. So that I, as the person who is very passionate about it and about taking better advantage of, people can be like, well, how do I find out this? Well, let's find out together. Let's go do this thing. So that's something that's worked, a particular technique that worked well, but I want to tie that back into the, something I heard somebody else mention is everybody learns differently. So there's that sense of how do you find the ways to maximize the ways to get that information out there. Sometimes it's writing the decision doc. Sometimes it's that you told the one engineer who likes to be able to say, here's the answer where the decision docs are, and here's how you can write your own decision doc. And so here's how you can empower yourself to be the person who wrote up the decision. Sometimes it's put it in the Slack channel, and some people read all the Slack channels. Sometimes it's put it in 5 Slack channels because people only read their team Slack channels. Sometimes it's the brown bag. Sometimes it's we record demos and then we have a channel where we share our demos. And sometimes that's what really gets people. It's the, again, it does take time, but if you're passionate enough about it and to sort of feedback into the doing the time up front to say, okay, I'm passionate about this. I want people to care about this. I'm going to figure out every possible way I can to get the word out there and hope that I finally get it to the next level, the next part of the onion, and those people start agreeing with me and they start proselytizing it. Yeah, there communication is hard. It is really fundamentally probably the hardest problem in our industry, if not all.
Yeah.
To build on,
Go ahead.
Luke and then
Cool.
Yanni.
Okay, sounds good. So to build on this, I will often talk with teams, and they're like, "Oh, we have to roll this out everywhere, whatever this might be. New library for monitoring. We're going to change whatever it is. Like it has to be everywhere tomorrow." And it's like the startup person to me, like, "Oh, no, 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 no. That's not the right way to do it. You have to start small. You have to prove that it works. You have to get those wins. You start to demonstrate to people that this really does help them, right? Which is some of the stuff that Stevie was talking about. We're doing the demos. There's good feelings. We go to the next team, and suddenly the thing will start to kind of take off, I think. And it may not too, because maybe not, no comment on Honeycomb. Maybe it's not the right tool for the engineers, right? And so I think like for me as a product person, I'd be like, the thesis is that Honeycomb solves these problems for these reasons. And so I would probably go team by team to try to do this. What we've done for this is, obviously I'm very SemGrep biased, but we use the SemGrep rule to detect instances of the kind of competitor usage. So if it's not Honeycomb, let's go identify all the places in the code base that we're doing it differently. And then from there, be like, cool, we've actually piped this to Datadog. And so we'll get trend lines over time of library usage and technology usage that we can track is going down over time. And we'll go team by team and basically sit with them to say, hey, we're going to actually help you through. We're an engineering team. We're going to help you, engineering team, make the transition. We've learned a bunch of stuff in the process. By the way, now we've built out our playbook and our run book because we've actually done this hands-on with you. Now it's cheaper to go to the next team and it's going to get a little bit faster. And hey, by the way, maybe we start to do some kind of auto fix, code modification type stuff. Great. So now that gets us started even faster. And again, this is just like you're trying to make it easier and easier and easier to change. And I think eventually what you'll get is, oh, hey, we see you're using this alternative library. Here's the replacement of Honeycomb. We prefer Honeycomb for these reasons. You don't have to click a README or anything. Here's the proposed code. Here's what it would look like. And then, if you want to read more on the docs, go for it. But I love the idea of you start small. You actually have a metric you can track over time to deprecate usage of these kind of alternative libraries. But I think it just takes a long time. If you're managing a lot of people, organizations move slowly because you have to educate, change old ways, et cetera. So it's just not an overnight thing. And I think I've worked with teams who I think make that mistake. They're like, oh yeah, we can just snap our fingers and it's fixed. And you can, it's just very painful for everybody involved.
So true.
Yeah, I think that's
Yanni, and then I want to give
answer.
Jaime a chance to finish up.
All right. Yeah, I think that's a great answer. So I've seen two ways at which it worked. One is top down, one is bottom up. No, so the top down one is like you get senior leadership sponsorship. It appears on everybody's OKR and it gets done. No, but then of course, like it needs to be, a lot of what Luke mentioned as well. Like there's a team that goes into the team to educate them on how to use it and really getting hands on. The other way that I found interesting is the bottom up approach, which is kind of like a Trojan horse approach, as you train these deputies in each team, and then have them get them really excited about this, like say the Honeycomb or like any tool that you want to introduce, and then have them spread the knowledge within the team for you. In this case, like you get an advocate basically, and the hardest thing is like you need someone to really enact the rules, right, at the code review level. And in this case, you get a pretty effective change within the team method that I have also seen work pretty well.
Everyone said everything, so it's really hard to add because you kind of said it all. I truly am. I look at the adoption of our own platform Codacy and our customers over the years, and I see that the customers have most success. They start with a project, they prove that has value, and then they go and evangelize the rest of the internal teams to say, hey, this is great, you should use this, right? So that works. So starting small and growing from that is good. But also, what Yanni is saying is so true. There's typically is one person or kind of a collection of people that are champions that just really feel strongly about either quality or security, and they go and push that message. And so tools get adopted that way. Internally for Codacy, we're very lenient and open. We see that many times as a source of motivation for people to choose their own technology. Programming language obviously is really hard because you have systems that are written and not going to be rewritten in different programming languages. But flexibility has been kind of the how we've been approaching internally, and we assume that also for our customers. So we try to offer education whenever they get it. We try to get them to pull from us to say, hey, you want to learn more? We'd love to teach you a bit how to get more of this tool. If you're completely satisfied, fine. You'll come back to us when you need it. So really hard to add after what you all said.
We're a minute over, but I want to leave us with one question that maybe we can all answer in the Slack channel to sort of get buzz going over there after we wrap things up. And it goes back to something that Jaime said and piggybacked off of Luke earlier about how there's just like so much stuff for us as software engineers to know and learn. And sometimes I have to take a deep breath and remind myself that there's not enough time in the world to learn all the things that I need to learn, or even that I want to learn, to be quite honest. So I'd love for all of you to, and maybe I'll drop the note and you can all thread off of their channel. How do you not get so anxious about all of these things that we have to learn and all of these risks that we have to weigh? And how do you just make that get out of your way so you can actually get stuff done? I'm sure a lot of people would appreciate your insights. Maybe it's meditation. I don't know.
Can I start before everyone says everything right? I'm kidding. I would say that you focus on your mission, you focus on what is really the most important thing that you got to be doing. And for many companies, especially small ones, many times will be product market fit. And do you need to have all the security in the world to get product market fit? No, you run the risk of having a Fort Knox with a few peanuts inside. And that's, I think, where we at least we as a company try to help as much as possible our customers, which is we try to help security and quality to be a no-brainer and out of the equation, so you can really focus on getting to that product market fit. If you're a larger company, also that's the same thing. You have only a few hours in the day. You get to focus on the most important thing, and I think that's at the end of the day what matters.
All right, being mindful of time, everyone else, let's move our answers over to the Slack. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in. I know I'm gonna have to rewatch this, honestly, because I think there was like really great tidbits in there for myself, and I'm gonna have to go in and just dissect them and write them all down. I did not take nearly enough notes. But thank you so much for tuning in to this panel. I hope you learned just as much as I did, and you'll tune in for more panels in the future. Thank you so much, everyone. See you in the Slack.